Hello and good evening to voters across America. I want to welcome you to a special interview with Dr. Jo Jorgensen, the Libertarian Party's nominee for president. Apologies that we are getting started a little bit later than we thought. We had a whole very nice setup in downtown Cleveland with a stage and everything, and not to play to libertarian stereotypes, but we ran into trouble with the cops. We were told by the police chief and that it had come from the mayor's office that first we couldn't have an audience, then we couldn't have a stage, then we couldn't have chairs. So we packed it all in for the studio that we are now at and that we are now joining you from. So thank you for bearing with us, and we are really glad to have you here. My name is Elizabeth Nolan Brown. I'm a senior editor at Reason Magazine and president of the group Feminists for Liberty. I'm going to be your moderator for tonight's event. I want to start by telling you guys a little bit about Dr. Jo Jorgensen. If you're an American voter, she will be on your ballot this November. She is one of 3 candidates who are on the ballot in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, along with her running mate, Jeremy Spike Cohen. This isn't her first go-round with electoral politics. In 1996, Jorgensen was the Libertarian Party nominee for vice president on the ticket with presidential candidate Harry Browne. She is also an entrepreneur and a senior lecturer at Clemson University in South Carolina. She has an MBA and a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. Welcome, Dr. Jo Jorgensen.
Oh, so glad to be here. It's such an honor to meet you. I've been a fan of Reason for quite some time.
It is very much an honor to be talking to you tonight, and I'd like to welcome you to my home state of Ohio.
Thanks. I'm a fellow Midwestern girl, so great to be back on my home turf.
First, I just want to say that I am both very excited to be here talking to you tonight and very disappointed to be here talking to you tonight. Disappointed because I wish that you and any alternative party candidate who had enough electoral access to win this thing could be up there on the debate stage tonight with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Right. But I'm excited because even if Republicans and Democrats need to exclude alternate parties in order to maintain their dominance, at least we can be here talking to the American people directly, many of whom I think are fed up with the two-party stranglehold on American politics, or just not really sure about what either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party are offering right now.
Right.
So I just want to, I've been a libertarian philosophically for a long time, but I just joined the Libertarian Party this year, and there is a reason for that.
Congratulations.
I think that, historically, I thought people with libertarian ideas could work through the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and their apparatuses because, at least Democrats cared about the First Amendment and were anti-war. At least Republicans cared about free markets and they were for deregulation. But in recent years, both seem to have turned against their historical principles and areas of alliance with libertarians, and sort of just turned against all principles except for maybe owning their opponents and forcing their preferred policies on everyone else. So I just want to take a broad view to start and ask you to tell people, many of whom might not be familiar with libertarianism or with your particular version of it, what does the Libertarian Party to you stand for, and what makes what you and the Libertarian Party are offering so much different than what the Republicans or the Democrats are offering?
Yeah, well, you bring up a great point. And when I first joined the party, when I first joined the movement 40 years ago, I would tell people we take the best of the Democrats and the best of the Republicans. But you can't say that anymore. They don't even have a core philosophy. It's basically the red team versus the blue team. And so now we've got, the Democratic Party, which used to be traditionally the party of anti-war. Now we've got Donald Trump saying he wants to bring the troops home. And what does the Democratic Party do? They say, no, you can't do that. So it's pretty much whatever the other guy doesn't want to do. But to directly answer your question, I tell people that the Libertarian Party is on your side, that you know best what's best for you, not the politicians and special interests in Washington, and that you have the right to make your own decisions and spend your own money. And that's what we're all about.
What do you say when, a lot of Republicans and Democrats right now say that with so much going on, with, the pandemic and social unrest and economic uncertainty and a Supreme Court seat at stake, that it's throwing your vote away to vote Libertarian, and a vote for Jorgensen would be a vote for Biden or a vote for Trump. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would suggest that voting for what you don't want is throwing your vote away. And let me say, I understand why people voted for Trump. I understand why the polls got it wrong, because basically he won because people who either had never voted or hadn't voted in 20 years got out there and voted, because they said, we want an outsider. We want somebody who's going to go in there and, he says he's a businessman, going to cut the budget, cut spending, bring the troops home. He can get it done. I'm going to vote for him. So I completely understand it. However, he has done none of that. And so what I would tell the average Republican is, okay, if you like the fact that Trump has increased the deficit even more, even faster than Obama, if you like the fact that the debt is even higher than it was under Obama, if you like the fact that he's done all of these things that are not acting like a Republican Party, go ahead and vote for Trump. But if that's not what you want, vote Libertarian and send a message to him, this is not why I put you in office. Now, if you're living in a solidly red state and you are a Trump voter and you're unhappy with him, it's a really easy choice to make. Trump's going to get the Electoral College votes anyway. So why not send Trump a message? This isn't why we put you in office. We put you in office to cut spending. You said you weren't a professional politician, but you sure are acting like one. If you're in a blue state and you like Joe Biden, you might say, you know what, Joe? You guys, you and the Democratic machine, you kept Tulsi Gabbard off the stage, you muzzled her voice. The only anti-war Democrat out there, you wouldn't even let her on stage with you. I don't like what you're doing. I'm going to vote Joe Jorgensen. At least you're sending a message to them that you don't like. But to wrap it up, I'd like to give the overall broad message, which there are 40 million Americans out there across the country who lean libertarian. Many of them haven't heard of our party. Many of them just haven't registered or haven't heard enough about us. If everybody who believed that they have the right to make their own decisions, that they shouldn't be following the lead of Washington, if they all voted the way they wanted to, I would win in a landslide. And I'd like to quote Ed Clark, who was our 1980 presidential candidate. By the way, the first presidential candidate who I ever voted for. And somebody asked him, do you think it's possible for you to win? And his answer was, you know what? If I could sit around the kitchen table of every American family in this country, I would win by a landslide. And that's what I believe in. And that's why I should be on the stage tonight, so that Americans could see a real alternative.
Thank you. Let's dive in then to some of the things that I'm sure that they will be talking about there tonight, and I'm glad that we get to be here with you talking about. So much of the response, the big thing on everyone's mind right now, obviously, COVID-19. So much of the response to that, it feels like, from government on either sides has been either caught up in culture war or in top-down orders about how everything has to be across the board. What role do you think, just to start broadly, what role do you think that the federal government has in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, it's fine for them to pass along information. It's fine for them to inform the American public of what's going on. What's not fine is for them to run our lives the way they've been doing. So when Trump first addressed the pandemic, he made two critical mistakes. The first thing he did was he didn't get the FDA out of the way of testing. And when people ask me, why are you running for president? My answer is because government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, too intrusive. But the worst part is they usually hurt the very people they're trying to help. And the FDA is just one example. The FDA is supposed to be there to help us, and instead they're getting in the way. They're getting in the way of testing. There were dozens of testing kits that we could have used. Instead, we didn't have access to any of them except for two tests in the beginning. Now it's opening up, but they are still being blocked. And the only way to know who can go out and work and who needs to stay home is through testing. The second thing he did is he stood on the stage with Dr. Fauci and said, don't get tested if you don't have symptoms. If you don't have symptoms, no need. And yet at that very time, they knew that over half the people with the virus didn't have any symptoms at all. Well, that's when you need to get tested, is when you don't have symptoms. So in other words, there were people who had the virus out there spreading it not even knowing that they had it. Now, I realize since then there's been some medical debate. Well, maybe they're not as contagious when they don't have symptoms. Maybe they are. You know, we're learning more about it. But at the time, we didn't know that. All we knew is over half the people who had the virus didn't have any symptoms. So what do? They shut down the whole economy. We lose tens of millions of jobs, and many of those jobs will never get back. And the other sad thing is, just for me, from a personal standpoint, one of my grandfathers is from Sweden. And of course, his family came here the reason, you know, most people come to America. They want freedom. And yet, his home country of Sweden, they weren't locked down. They weren't all under house arrest. They got to go out shopping. Their schools didn't close. They could go out to restaurants. Meanwhile, here in the supposed land of the free, home of the brave, we're all under house arrest, not being able to go to our jobs. So, you know, everything is just backwards, and government had far overreached. Now, let me quickly add, I know a lot of people said, well, Trump didn't shut down the government. No, but he stood there on that stage, you know, using his influence to try to persuade governors to take, you know, to lead the way into shutting down the economy. And then after it's shut down, when he gets what he wants, then he turns around and says, oh, no, I didn't mean that, open it back up. We should have never shut down.
Yeah, I got very much the impression that Trump wanted to sort of have it both ways and say, like, I want to do this thing, but no, the governors are doing it. No, like, I didn't do that once it was, you know, in play. So,
well, that's a typical politician response.
I mean, yeah, I don't see how we're going to have, you know, get back to normal without rapid testing, and I know that they're still sort of holding things up with the way that, you know, the FDA still hasn't approved some at-home tests.
Yeah, rapid testing or vaccine or just some common sense. And I saw a headline about that masks might help prevent the flu better than vaccines. And my thought was, oh no, are we all going to now wear masks for the next 60 years and nobody gets vaccines? This is just outrageous.
So you would, you know, you would not have a mask mandate then, I assume, if you were.
No, but let me point out that there's a myth, there's kind of this feeling, this underlying assumption in our government that if the federal government doesn't do it, it doesn't get done. And Walmart proved them wrong. Walmart came along and said, we don't care what the laws are, we're not going to ask you to, or we are going to ask you to wear a mask. Anybody who sets foot in our store, I don't care if you're an employee or a customer or a vendor, you're going to wear a mask. And then several stores followed suit. So, you know, sometimes people ask me, what's the difference between a libertarian and the Democrats and Republicans? And I would say here's the biggest difference of all, which is that Democrats and Republicans want to have us put somebody in office and then pass a law, and then we all live under that law for the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever. Whereas libertarians want you to make your own decisions. They want you to vote every day, vote with your feet, vote with your dollars. So for instance, with the mask, under the Democrat or Republican way of doing it, they pass a mask mandate. Half the people are happy, but half the people are unhappy, and then we all live under the same laws. Under a libertarian society, we have some stores like Walmart and the many stores that follow them who say you have to wear a mask, but then we also allow other stores, you know, retail businesses, restaurants, whatever, to have to be allowed to operate their business without a mask. So then you every day get to vote. Do I want to live in a society with masks or one without masks? And you get to choose.
What about when it comes to federal spending on the coronavirus pandemic?
Oh my gosh, if there's anything worse than the mask law, if that's possible, I would say it's the spending. And I know a lot of people are happy to get their $1,200 check and they say, oh, isn't this great? But my question is, do you know where that money's coming from? It's eventually coming, you know, that money has to come from somewhere. And I heard that the checks were slowed down because Donald Trump wanted his name on it. Well, that'd be fine if the money was coming out of his back pocket, but it's not. It's coming from us. So why would we want to send money to Washington and then have them print checks, send them back to us? But, oh, by the way, we're going to keep some of that money aside and we're going to give it to the corporations, the airlines, and other people. And again, I say let the people decide who should stay in business and who shouldn't. Personally, I would rather keep the money, and then I would have spent it on local mom and pop stores in my town, as opposed to letting it go to the big corporations. And here's what makes it worse, is that the federal government, or well, maybe not the federal government so much, but by example, you know, by being in the bully pulpit, and influencing the governors. Basically, they sent the message of, okay, we're going to prop up these corporations. These big corporations, we're not going to shut them down. They get to continue to work. They get to continue to do business. Oh, but your mom and pop clothing store, you got to shut down. So now what happens with the CARES package? Oh, the big corporations get the money. How about we get to keep the money and we get to vote again, vote with our dollars. We get to decide who gives us the best quality, best service, best product.
I think we're ready for an audience question.
Oh, great.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Chin and I'm a student from New York. Dr. Jorgensen, how will you make it easier for minimum wage workers to survive?
Hello, my name is.
So the minimum wage is a good question. First of all, the minimum wage tends to affect those people who are at the lower end of the economic wage scale, and people of color more adversely than everybody else. Because typically minimum wage jobs are a way to get your foot in the door. And by the way, when I was in high school, I had a minimum wage job myself, and I was thrilled to get it. And it taught me, you know, how to be a good employee, how to arrive on time, get a paycheck, and do what I'm told. And then I quickly moved up. And if you look at the statistics, you'll see that people who are on a minimum wage job level are not there for long. They move up very quickly. So the question, really the question of how do you expect somebody to live on a minimum wage job, I don't expect them to live on it. I expect them to use that as a stepping stone to get to a higher level paying job, which is what happens in a free market.
That's, you know, sort of brings us back to on the COVID question, you know, with all these jobs being lost, and you can't, we've shown that you both shouldn't and can't tell people just to not earn a living,
right,
or to not go out and leave their homes, or to not spend money.
Well, they did.
Well, they did, but it's not working so well. You know, people haven't been following it, and it's not been working out. So, you know, how. It's also hard, though, to tell people just that they should go back to work necessarily, or that they should go out and spend money. So
right,
how do you think that you can, you know, help bring people jobs back and get them out of this recession without that sort of, you know, top-down?
Well, and you know what? You brought up a really good point about, you know, paying people to stay home. And I ran into a personal experience. I went to visit the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire. Great group of people, by the way. I mean, Libertarians are great all over the country. However, I spent more time up there in my VP campaign. I've gotten to know them. And we went to this great restaurant, great food, and it was probably, and I'm not going to name the restaurant, but it was probably the worst service I had seen. And I was like, wow, this is really unusual. I've never been to a place like this, where there were 3 of us in the group, and 2 of us had completely finished eating before the 3rd person even got his food. And we had to go to an event, so we had to leave before he even got his food. So then, of course, we have to arrange car transportation and all that. Well, I found out later what had happened was that the government paycheck started, and that a lot of those people were being paid more to stay home than go to work. And out of something like 25 employees, only 3 people came back to work. And so this poor restaurant owner had to train people, new people, like how do you do that? How do you train, 90% of your staff overnight? You can't. And I'm amazed that he did a job as well as he did. So once again, we've got a free market, we've got people who are willing and able to go out and work, and then the government gives perverse consequences. They give a reward for doing the wrong thing, and we end up with an upside down economy like we have. So yeah, so how do we get how do we get over this recession? How do we get back on track? Obviously, we need more jobs. We need deregulation. We need, if you look at what the Democrats and Republicans have done, we've gotten something like 450 federal agencies with something like 60,000 pages of regulations. So once again, the corporations have the advantage. How is the little guy supposed to stay in business? But it's very clear that money left in the private sector, money left in the hands of business owners, create twice as many jobs as money put to the federal government. And here's my question to you. Would you rather have the money in the hands of, Bill Gates or General Motors and have them create jobs? Or do you want to give that same money to Trump or Biden and let them hand out jobs? I say let the people who are producing create the jobs.
So that's when we're doing, that's how you do this when we're dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. What about in normal times? I know, Trump talks a lot about bringing back, well, I guess both of them talk a lot about, bringing back manufacturing jobs and things like that, and seem very much focused on this backward-looking view of how we're going to get jobs. Do you have any prescriptions for how you would, help increase the jobs that are available to Americans, or at least their ability to get these jobs?
Well, yeah, and he did start down the right path of that, yes, but didn't go nearly far enough. We do need to way reduce regulations and way reduce corporate taxes to get them out. But again, the federal government doesn't create wealth. The federal government doesn't create any jobs. In order to get the economy going, we need to increase the economy here. And again, Here's a question that I sometimes ask people. Let's say that you've got $10,000, let's say you've got an inheritance, $10,000, and you want to put your money to good. And maybe you want to help people, whatever. Maybe you want to help your friends start a new business, loan them the money to start a new business. Maybe you want to give it to charity, give it to some local charity, or give it to a church. Or would you give that $10,000 to a federal government program? And it usually makes a person stop and go, wait a minute, come to think of it, I think I would rather give the money to them. And we've seen even people who say, tax me more, take more of my money. We hear Bill Gates say that. We hear Oprah Winfrey say that. And yet Oprah Winfrey goes out, starts her own charity, starts her own school for girls. Bill Gates has the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they're doing their work. Well, my question to you, Bill Gates, if you think the federal government can do such a better job of anything, why don't you simply turn that money over to the federal government? Why are you doing it yourself? So, and I'm not a Bill Gates fan, but you know what? Even I would rather give my money to Bill Gates. Even he would do a much better job than the federal government at anything.
Yeah, one of the things I find with the federal government, whenever they have the money, so much of it just goes to the administrative part. So when you have, they're trying to do good work, but too much of it goes to the bloat. So yeah, people know how to spend their money, whether it's for charity or not, I think.
And you mentioned bloat. It's funny you said that. So professors tend to be a little liberal, and when I went back and got my PhD in industrial organizational psychology, so it's basically business psychology, one of my professors who knew I was a libertarian said, well, Joe, the private or businesses have bureaucracies too, not just the federal government. And I said, yeah, but I'm not required to support it.
Right.
I don't get my money taken away from me. If UPS has bureaucracy, then I go to FedEx because their prices go up. If FedEx gets too much bureaucracy, then I go to FedEx. So, the winner gets to come out ahead with lower prices, and I get to go to the winner, and I don't have to pay those bloated prices.
I think what you said about, the president doesn't create jobs is obviously very true and important. One of the few things, that I thought that Obama did well in this regard was push the occupational licensing reform thing, which, there's not a lot of federal occupational licenses,
right.
But he at least made nods towards that. Do you think that that's an area that's good for, the federal government to get involved in, at least helping, or would you be, I guess, what would you do with regards to occupational licensing? And do you think that's a big issue?
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. Now, you're correct. It's not a federal issue. If I were running for a local office or for state office, absolutely. That would probably be one of the top things on my list. Because, you know, we just had the guest here ask about minimum wage. Well, what if you could start a business in your home? What if you could start, you know, braiding hair or cutting hair or whatever? What if you could start a business without going through all the corporate, or, you know, the lawyers to get incorporated, without going through all the licensing? And, oh, by the way, if you want to cut somebody's hair, here's what you have to do. Or even worse, let's look at hair braiding, which I had this discussion with a black preacher who said, well, that's a cultural thing for us. And I said, well, exactly, but here's what the government has done, is if you are a black woman who wants to braid hair and you want to charge your friends, neighbors, family, whatever, what the government is going to do is going to make you spend thousands of dollars to take classes which sometimes don't even include what it is you want to do. We saw that with eyebrow threading years ago. They were required to take classes on something they weren't even getting licensed for. And oh, by the way, who's getting the money? Your competitors, because you have to take the classes from them. So now you've got somebody who's poor, disadvantaged, who's concerned about making a minimum wage. And what they have to do is they have to spend thousands of dollars, give it to their competitor, spend thousands of dollars with the government, with lawyers, business licenses, and so forth. Why not just let people start a business out of their home? It's ridiculous. So yes, anything at the federal level, that should be pretty easy to get rid of. But again, that's mostly state and local governments and of course libertarians at all levels. You know, we were looking at some of the people running for office at a state and local level, which, by the way, libertarians out there, please support your state and local candidates. If we can get them into office, we can get rid of these egregious laws.
Thank you. I think we are ready for another video question.
My name is Kenita Watson. I'm from Sunnyvale, California. Dr. Jorgensen, I'd like to hear your opinion on what you think needs to be done in the area of criminal justice reform, and in particular, how this would impact people of color.
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think you make a good point to bring up people of color, because yes, the criminal justice system needs to be fixed at all levels, and especially for the people of color. Now, obviously, we need to get rid of the things that we've heard about in the news, such as no-knock raids, qualified immunity, militarization of the police. All of these things are just egregious. I would like to spend a few minutes on the war on drugs, though, because I hear so many people say, well, I don't use illegal drugs, so that doesn't really affect me. I don't care about that. But what I would like to point out is that if you have children in the school, if your house is broken into, you need to worry about it. That, well, here's a question I ask. When's the last time you heard of a liquor store owner going up and down the halls of a high school trying to sell gin to high school students? Or when's the last time you heard of a vodka addict breaking into houses to support a vodka habit? Or when's the last time you heard of two liquor store owners having a shootout over the best corner? Those are not drug problems. Those are drug prohibition problems, and they affect all of us, even those of us who don't use illegal drugs. So we've got to get rid of this madness. You know, you go back to alcohol prohibition, you can see how poorly it went. We had gangs, we had Al Capone, we had shootings in Chicago where Al Capone was known to, you know, that was his major place. And now what do we have? We've got drug gangs. And drug gangs in Chicago with shootouts with innocent people being shot. And if you look at the drug laws, first of all, they break up families, and you know, of course, all families, but in particular, people of color are discriminated against with that. Because first of all, if you look at drugs that people of color use versus drugs that whites use, the drugs that people of color use have longer prison sentences. And, oh, by the way, even though people of color and whites use illegal drugs at about the same rate, about 6 times as many people of color are locked up. So we need to get rid of that, and we need to get, you know, put the help where it belongs. If we have substance abuse problems, we need to look into that. So in general, we need to get rid of so-called victimless crimes. If there is no victim, there is no crime. And we should be allowed to own anything, not anything, let me say any object, any inanimate object, whether it's a gun to protect yourself or whether it's drugs for whatever reason you wish. It's the prohibition that's causing the problem, not the drugs. And so that would help end part of the racist, the problems that we have, the racist war on drugs. That's had a quadrupling, by the way, of our prison population since 1980. And I'd like to point out that we have about 5% of the world's population, but about 20% of its prisoners, and that's just egregious. The United States pretty much leads in that area.
So to follow up on that, what would you do then? What steps? How do you end the war on drugs? I agree, we need to do that, and it's a really good thing, but so how do you go about dismantling this?
Well, the first thing I would do, first day in office, is pardon anybody at the federal level. Now, I can't do that at a state or local level, but at a federal level, I would pardon anyone convicted of a so-called victimless crime, which isn't really a crime. And then I would go to my attorney general and say, okay, we're not going after these people. You know, if you keep arresting people, if your people keep arresting people and putting them in jail for victimless crimes, I'm going to let them out the next day anyway. So just stop it. You're wasting your time. And then I would work with the attorney general to just start decriminalizing drugs. Because again, it's the prohibition, not the actual drug use. And I had a little discussion with somebody on a podcast last week who said, well, I can understand maybe legalizing marijuana, but not something like crystal meth, because, you know, I don't want a meth house next to my house, you know, because toxic fumes, you know, you can buy a house with all the poisonous, residue in there, and I don't want my kids around all that poison. Well, my question is, when's the last time you heard of somebody making bathtub gin? You know, we've got, alcohol is legal, so we don't have people next door operating gang-style alcohol houses like we have meth houses. So we got to put a stop to that. I would much rather have Philip Morris, Seagram's, any of these other companies who are dealing with other drugs, legal drugs, I'd rather have them making the meth than somebody next door, absolutely.
You mentioned a little bit, all of this when you were leading in, but you would support legislation to end qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. What about no-knock raids? You said you would end.
Oh, absolutely. Really the biggest reason that they're using no-knock raids, or one of the biggest, if not the biggest, is because of the war on drugs. Because, like, if you're a criminal who's, let's say, murdered somebody, they don't have to do a no-knock raid because they've got evidence. You know, they've got your fingerprints on a gun, they've got the ballistics on the gun, they've got witnesses, they've got blood, they've got whatever. But drugs, you can flush it down the toilet. So now we've got innocent people being shot, and sometimes they serve warrants at places that are the wrong residence. We've heard of preachers being killed, just completely, what if you happen to buy a house that used to have a drug dealer in there? Again, if we have Philip Morris making all of our drugs, then we don't have these problems.
What about mandatory minimums? I think that's been one of the most destructive things, is these mandatory minimum sentences that, say people have to go away, judges have no discretion. Could you pledge to not sign any bills that have new mandatory minimums built into them? Absolutely,
absolutely. Judges, do we trust our judges or not? We've given them a job to do. Let's let them do their job. Absolutely, I would get rid of mandatory minimums as soon as possible and give the discretion back to the judges. Let them do their jobs. That's just so typical one-size-fits-all federal government. They come up with one rule that might fit one situation, and somehow they think it fits every other situation in the entire country. And by the way, let me point out that's probably what's going on in the debates with Trump and Biden. They're probably both arguing over which one-size-fits-all crime bill, or which one-size-fits-all drug bill, or what one-size-fits-all healthcare bill can I come up with that will fit everybody in the country. But you can't, which is why you need the libertarian way, where I say, you know best what's best for you. You need to be able to vote with your feet or vote with your dollars every day. You make your choices.
Do you think that all of these reforms would lead to a cutting of the federal police forces and law enforcement agencies?
Well, I would like to see some of the the police cut, for instance, the FBI agents.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm fine with leave if you want to have an FBI that's like an advisory, maybe a lab where states can,
Right.
see as an advisory kind of clearinghouse, that's fine. But as far as federal agents, I mean, a lot of them, if you watch these FBI shows and movies and stuff, they're usually there for drugs anyway. So absolutely. And I'd like to point out, take it one step further and point out that crime is a local issue. Whether it's assault, robbery, burglary, anything like that. That's a local issue that should be decided among the local people. The police department, mayor, city council, voters, homeowners, let them decide how they want to run their police.
I think that's probably a good time to bring us to spending more generally,
Yes.
since we're talking about things that we spend a lot of money on. Nobody really seems to want to talk about spending this election, or really, I guess,
wonder
any
why.
election. But yeah, libertarians, we love to talk about cutting spending. So let's just say what are the top three things that you would cut first, or the top main things that you would cut spending on as president?
Would you mind if I first responded to your comment? Because
Yes, sure.
This is one example of, Republicans used to talk about cutting spending. Notice you don't hear them talking about cutting spending anymore, which is why I can no longer say a libertarian takes the best of both the Democrats and Republicans, because there is no best left. So as far as spending goes, we absolutely need a strong military. We need to defend our shores, we need to defend our borders, we need to have military strength that we can't be invaded. However, we don't need to be around the world. We're in 160 different countries. We're in places like France and Germany. We're in the Middle East. That's where we need to cut our spending, from overseas. And, what's surprising to people when I point this out, because a lot of them say, well, I'm sure the troops won't like that. Actually, they love it. And I've talked to so many people who've come back from Afghanistan or Iraq, and they say, I've seen things that nobody should ever have to see. And we're not doing any good over there. We're not helping. Why are you ruining lives like this? And to bring in a former Libertarian Presidential Candidate, Ron Paul, you may have heard that when he was running for president, that actually he received more contribution from our service people overseas, more donations to his campaign than all the other Republicans combined. And people were shocked. Why would soldiers be against it? Because they've seen firsthand how worthless it is. And also, I'd like to point out, everybody keeps telling us how great France is. They get 5-week vacations. Well, maybe we'd get 5-week vacations too if we weren't paying for their military. I mean, why should taxpayers in Alabama, Wyoming, wherever pay for France's military? Let them pay for their own military. Maybe we can get longer vacations. So I am a college lecturer, keep in mind, so I know that I'm very good at giving long answers. The next two would be pretty short. So you asked me areas to cut. First one, military around the world, but not military defense for our country. The second, Department of Education. Depending on which numbers you look at or where they go, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 per pupil goes to the federal government. And for every dollar that goes to the federal government, you only get something like 11 cents back. So why are we putting money into a Department of Education? Again, just like I said, crime is local, so is education. Parents, teachers, and students, the needs of rural Appalachia, much different than the needs of students in New York City or people in Ohio. Let them make their own decisions. No reason to have a one-size-fits-all federal government. And third, it would be aid to foreign, basically foreign dictators, foreign governments. And, I'm not against, if Americans want to donate their own money to certain countries around the world, that's fine. That's their freedom. That's their right as an American citizen. But the government shouldn't forcibly take money and give it to other countries around the world.
I think we're going to get into a little bit more about military and
Okay.
foreign policy in a little bit. But first, just to, sort of, I think people hear cutting spending too, and sometimes it's like, how is that going to help me? And maybe that's why people don't like to talk about it, because your average, voter hears that and it's like, that just seems like I'm going to get less stuff, less services, less things. So why do you think that, these reforms, cutting these spending things would help American voters?
Yeah, and I have had some people say, well, but wait a minute, even if you cut military support over in France, we've still got a local factory making aircraft, or we've still got, people making supplies. And my answer is, okay, well, that money's got to go somewhere. So instead of spending that money on military aircraft, why not buy a trip and go take a vacation? We can still have the jets, but instead of using them around the world, how about you get to go somewhere for vacation? So you've still got that, rather than having that money taken from you to be put somewhere else, wouldn't you rather be in control of those dollars? And again, education, right now we've got teachers who are taking, this is just a crime. We've got teachers taking money out of their own pockets to buy boxes of Kleenex and crayons and stuff. Wouldn't it be nice if $500 per student got to stay there? At least our teachers wouldn't have to be taking money out of their own pocket. So all of this, and that's that's the thing. I got to admit, I'm a numbers person. I love numbers. So I'd like to point out that, we're talking, trillions and dollars and stuff, but I would tell every American family, look, how would you like to have that extra money for education for your kid? And maybe you could send your kid to a different school or a better school. Instead of your portion going to the military to go overseas, wouldn't you rather have that money to spend on a vacation somewhere? We're talking real dollars here that are being taken out of our pockets.
So it's not always about cutting across the board, but redistributing who gets to decide that spending too. So local communities are spending more of that money within their own communities instead of
absolutely
halfway around the world, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And we can talk about charity and so, but there are so many issues that we should let local people make their own decisions. And this is, if you don't mind my going off topic here for just a minute, because I've had so many people ask me, why do you think we're so polarized? And I think one answer is because we make every decision through the government. And I think education is a great example. Let's say, because you were talking about decision making, let's say you want to send your kid to a school with prayer, or a school that requires vaccines or whatever. Maybe it requires masks or stay home or whatever it is. And let's say your neighbor doesn't. Right now, the way the Democrats and Republicans work, it's you, again, get a one-size-fits-all, where you each support your own candidate, you each give money to your candidate, you get all your friends to vote for your candidate, but you put the yard signs out, and then comes election day, you vote. One of you is going to win, one of you is going to lose, and you're all going to be in a one-size-fits-all. Wouldn't it be better if you kept your resources and you can send your kid to a school with prayer and your neighbor can send his kid to a school without prayer? Why do we have everything go through the government? So I think we're so polarized because somehow we're all supposed to agree. Somehow we're all supposed to agree on how Social Security works. We're all supposed to agree on healthcare. How can we? I mean, and I jokingly said to somebody that, at least they haven't gotten to the grocery stores yet. What if we start voting on that? What if we start voting, okay, are we all going to be vegetarian or are we all going to be steak eaters? I mean, of course we'd be polarized if we put that before a vote. But you think about it, some of these decisions about schooling, about healthcare are very personal, just like diet. Why are we all voting on a one-size-fits-all?
Thank you. I think we are ready for another audience question.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Jorgensen.
Hey.
My name is Marta Howard. I'm from Fairfax County, Virginia. And I know the price for my drugs and insurance premiums and co-pays has gone through the roof in the last several years. What would you do as president to bring these costs down?
Yeah, so great question. So the question was basically, what about co-pays and deductibles and stuff? Basically, why is healthcare going up? And I would suggest that once again, it's through the federal government, because once you get government involved, prices go up because there's no accountability. And the problem we have right now with our health insurance, and you specifically mentioned deductibles or copays, the problem with our insurance is that it's not insurance at all, that it's prepaid health care. And so since it's not insurance, costs aren't held low like they are in regular insurance that you see in any other industry. So for instance, take car insurance. What if your car insurance paid for gas, oil, and car washes? First of all, you'd have absolutely no reason to shop around for the cheapest gas prices. In fact, you might even go to the nicest gas station because maybe they give you free coffee while you sit there and wait. Because what do you care? You pay your little $5 copay and off you go. And the gas stations would have absolutely no reason to compete because they don't have to, because you have your little $5 copay and off you go. What they do is they can raise their prices without you even knowing. And why is that? Because they simply pass them along to the insurance companies. They would pass it along to the car insurance companies, and what would the car insurance companies do? The following year, they would raise your premiums. So basically, you're not shopping around for the best prices, and we get in this vicious cycle, and that's what we have right now. Patients have absolutely no reason to shop around for the best prices, and health providers don't have any reason to offer the best prices, and so the insurance companies, they just keep raising the prices, and then we're the ones left footing the bill. So if you look around the world, and by the way, I don't understand why we've got politicians from the Democrats and Republicans suggesting we follow failed policies like the single-payer systems in Great Britain and Canada, which we could have a whole segment just on that. You know, they keep saying we need Medicare for all. When I hear them say we need Medicare for all, what I hear them say is we need VA hospital for all. And we know that top-down monopoly hasn't worked well at all. And so how about looking at a system that has worked? And right now, I would say that Singapore has one of the better systems where they've introduced competition, where people do have to compete for prices because, first of all, their insurance is really insurance, just like our car insurance is really car insurance. And so when it comes around to buying the equivalent of gas and oil, you take it out of your own money, and prices are held down. But here's the good thing, because your next reaction might be, well, but what if I can't pay those prices? The beauty of the system is in Singapore, the average doctor visit is only $10. That's actually less than our copay. That's less than our deductible. So here we have a bloated system thanks to the government system. Wouldn't it be better to have competition where people compete for us? In Singapore, they spend something like a third of what we spend per person. And by the way, the state of Indiana also has has a similar system for its employees, where people are given the healthcare dollars where they go around and the doctors have to compete for them. And let me just mention one last thing, because we've heard Trump, we've heard other people talk about, why don't we have a law where healthcare providers are required to post their prices? Well, notice we don't have any laws telling grocery stores they have to post their prices, or gas stations, or car dealerships, or computer manufacturers, because they have to post their prices in order to get our business. So why shouldn't healthcare be the same way? And the only two somewhat free market industries, which would be LASIK surgery and cosmetic surgery, because people pay out of their own pocket, they do post their prices, and guess what? Their prices have gone down dramatically over the last 20 years, and quality has gone up.
So how do we get there?
That's a great question, because, and this is where there is a little disagreement in the party, and I believe that you can't just pull out the rug from underneath people. Right now, if we said, okay, free market, everybody, you go out and pay for your own healthcare services, well, the prices are already way too high because of the federal government. So what I would do is I would start with the VA healthcare system. I would start because, first of all, veterans, my gosh, they were willing to sacrifice their lives for our country. They deserve better than what they're getting. What I would do is I would do what the state of Indiana does. And with veterans and with Medicare and Medicaid, I would actually put the dollars in their pockets and then provide them with the catastrophic care and say, okay, you go around and you get to shop. You get to shop around for prices. And guess what? You don't have to go to a monopoly that does. And by the way, can I just point out, I don't understand why Democrats are so against monopolies when it comes to corporations, but oh, no problem in the federal government. And with something like healthcare, which is a life or death situation, a life or death issue. This is the last place you want a monopoly. So what I would do is I would put healthcare dollars into the pockets of veterans, Medicare and Medicaid. Let them shop around for prices. Let them get the ball rolling so that people start competing just like they have in LASIK surgery and cosmetic surgery, just like they do in Singapore. And then once those prices start dropping, then the rest of the country can drop in. But you're absolutely right. We can't just let everybody loose now because the government has destroyed it.
Do you think that what steps can we take then outside of veteran health care? Are there other sort of around the margins changes you would make or deregulations you would make? Oh yeah, well like I said, first of all, also Medicare and Medicaid. Okay. So these are large groups of people. So Medicare and Medicaid, that's a huge chunk of people. So I would do it for all three groups. Okay. I was just pointing out veterans because my heart breaks that, again, these people are willing to risk their lives. So I tend to, again, you hear horror stories about the VA.
So being a teacher, I tend to go off track, especially when I talk about veterans. But yeah, those are large enough groups of people that I think we can get the ball rolling. And also, again, I would use the bully pulpit the way that Trump did. And I would tell states, look, you need to get rid of these certificate of need laws. A lot of people don't realize, the way the free market works is you've got, and I realize this is a simplified example, but I'm going to use it anyway. You've got a McDonald's, right? And then Burger King decides, okay, we're going to build a Burger King right across the store, or Wendy's or Chick-fil-A or, whatever. And, if there's enough business, they have business. If it's not, one of them goes out of business. With healthcare, though, you can't just build a clinic. You can't just build a hospital. You can't just go out and buy an MRI or a CAT scan or something like that. You have to go to the government and show that there's a need. Well, why? Why let the government make those decisions? Why not just let people risk their money the way they do in any other business? If a clinic goes out of business because they guessed wrong, let them go out of business just like a normal business does. And also, I'd like to point out, going back to the coronavirus, one of the reasons that Dr. Fauci, and Trump said that we needed to all stay home and all wear masks is that there weren't enough hospitals or ventilators to take care of us. Well, why not? Because we've got these certificate of need laws that are restricting that. So there are just so many levels of healthcare. Unfortunately, many of them are at the state and local level, so I would encourage governors to take specific steps. But what I can do at the federal level is work with those three groups.
Is there anything you can do at the federal level about telemedicine? I know that that's been a big boon during the pandemic. We've loosened some, and I think that this is an FDA thing, and Trump loosened some, but now they've already been maybe tightening it back up, or states are talking about tightening it back up. So do you think we should keep this loosening of telemedicine, teleappointments for health in place?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It should be between a doctor and a patient, or might I add, an alternative healthcare provider and a patient, because that's the other thing. The government has the government indirectly puts a quota on how many doctors and nurses can graduate each year. So they artificially keep the supply, here, I'm sorry, I'm talking numbers again. They artificially hold the number low so that they can charge whatever they want. And, I remember when I was getting my MBA, and this was when, we were just coming out of a recession, and they were talking about how people with English PhDs were driving taxi cabs. Well, notice, we never hear about medical doctors driving taxi cabs. It's not like, well, there's not enough places for them to work. That's because they keep it artificially low. I mean, you keep anything artificially low, plumbers or hairdressers or whatever, prices are going to go up because there aren't enough of them. Now, no, that doesn't mean I want medical doctors to be driving taxi cabs. I mean, I know what the media is going to do with that. You know, Joe Jorgensen wants medical doctors to drive taxi cabs. Absolutely not. What I'm saying is, let's let the market decide how many doctors we need. Let's let prices give that information of how many doctors we need, and not bureaucrats in Washington.
Also, you know, another thing I think that I talk about a lot is, you know, not making drugs over the counter that should be. A big one is birth control pills, which are super safe and effective. They're, you know, been proven to be as safe and effective as aspirin, and yet they're not available over the counter. So is there room for, you think, for us to have more, you know, medicines over the counter than currently are? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, heck, if I'm going to decriminalize crystal meth, of course I want birth control over the counter. Probably kind of a silly question, so, I guess. I mean, just making sure, you know. Well, I want to get my birth control and meth at the same time, so. Well, just like I don't want my next door neighbor making crystal meth in his bathtub, I don't want him making birth control pills either. So, yeah, let's have them be over the counter. You know, let's open it up, and let's just get the FDA out of regulation, because unfortunately what happens right now is only those drug manufacturers with the money and resources to even get a drug to market, because it costs something like $10 billion. Or $1 billion. You know, with the government, there's so many zeros. Yeah, a bill. It all sounds the same. It's you know, yeah, it's like, yeah, those billions start heading up to real money, right? Yeah, no, it costs something like $1 billion, $1 to $2 billion per drug to bring it to market. Thanks in part to the FDA, and oh, by the way, 10 years as well. And the problem is once these companies with enough money and power get that patent, then they weaponize our patent because they hold a monopoly. So we need to open it up so that people can get the drugs they need without the federal government. And again, I go back to why I'm running for office, because the federal government, actually every level, but especially the federal government, ends up hurting the very people they're trying to help. Thank you. We are going to move on now to foreign policy and military and peace and neutrality and all of that good and bad stuff. This is another issue that's not getting a lot of play in the 2020 election. As you mentioned earlier, Trump, you know, occasionally likes to portray himself as the anti-war candidate, even though nothing in his you know, tenure so far has really seemed to justify that. Democrats often always, you know, talk about them being to the left of Republicans on military issues, but then vote for everything that Republicans want, or when they have the power, end up sort of, you know, voting for the same level of spending and getting us in the same involvement. So, as president, how would you actually begin to disentangle us from all of our military engagements, or actually begin to bring troops home? Excuse me. Well, the good news is, as president, I can do that. As commander-in-chief, I get to do that. And I would begin that on day one. And you know, some libertarians don't think I bash Trump enough. But let me say, you know, I've been a libertarian long enough. I know what it's like to have the media against you. I think that Trump might have actually been sincere when he said he wanted to bring the troops home, but I think he was unwilling to get rid of the military-industrial complex. You know, there are so many special interests. These people are after their livelihoods. And some of these people in the military, when they retire, they get these highly paid consulting jobs where they make, you know, as much money in a month as the average person makes in a year. And it's hard to fight against that. So he talked about draining the swamp. You know, he definitely didn't drain the military swamp. And then he brings back John Bolton, who, you know, was so pro-war with Bush. It's like, I'm not sure why he would choose somebody who is pro-war, unless, again, he just wasn't willing to get rid of the military-industrial complex. So I, however, on the other hand, I'm not well connected. I'm not worried about losing my high-placed friends, or losing, you know, business, or losing cash flow. I will go in there and I will say, you're out of a job. Nothing would make me feel better.
than to get rid of some of these high-ranking military people who are making so much money that the average American, you think about it, it's the average American who has to budget, who has to decide, do we get a new car this year, or do we, go on a nicer vacation, or, can we send our kid to a better school? They're making these decisions. Meanwhile, their money is going to pay this military-industrial complex to fight in wars we don't want to be in, to be around the world. It's just travesty.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story last week about how a bunch of the money that the Pentagon got for coronavirus relief went to paying military defense contractors.
Yes, again, yeah, defense contractors.
Yeah, it was not for, direct sort of anything. It was for, developing new, just all sorts of random things, so.
Yeah, exactly, and it's our taxpayer dollars, and that's why I say, wouldn't you rather take that money and spend it at your local mom and pop store? I would.
You've talked about bringing troops home from the Middle East and Afghanistan. What about Europe? Would you want the U.S. to stay in NATO?
I don't see any reason to, and in fact, Trump did kind of toy around with the idea of leaving the UN, leaving some of these organizations, but never.
Sorry, I meant the United Nations.
Yeah, well, but yeah, I knew what you meant. So I was just going to put them under one big umbrella.
Thank you for translating there.
Because I mean, but that brings up a great point. We've got this alphabet soup where it just keeps growing and growing and growing. We need to get rid of so many of them. So, and it's hard to keep up with them all. And pretty much all of them should be gotten rid of. But Trump kind of toyed with saying, yeah. And he was talking about them paying their fair share. Well, here's how they can pay their fair share. We get out. And guess what? They'll have to pay their fair share because we're not paying it for them. I mean, again, we need to be, what I want to do is I want to turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. Absolutely, we have to protect our shores. Excuse me. And some people have asked me, why do you compare it to Switzerland? Well, two reasons. First of all, when I say I want to bring our troops home, sometimes I get two objections. One is, well, I don't want to be a pacifist. Well, heck, Switzerland's not, they're not pacifists. And secondly, I hear, but I don't want to be an isolationist. Well, again, Switzerland is a banking capital, they've got tourism, people come and go. I want to be a vibrant economy. And so I want to make peace with people and trade freely, but there's no reason for us to be in these needless, endless wars and to be putting our money around the world like that. Again, let Americans take that portion of their money and go to France for vacation instead of supporting their military.
A lot of times when people talk about not, maybe doing some of the direct military interventions, they still are very big fans of, sanctions and embargoes and things like that. I found it interesting on your website, you say sanctions and embargoes are nothing less than old-fashioned sieges.
Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Exactly. Excuse me. Exactly. That you are being a bully and you are saying we're not going to let the goods pass. And you're basically kind of playing king of the hill and making decisions for other people. And I would say that that's immoral because people should be allowed to trade freely with whoever they want. So, and not only is it correct on a moral level in that if you had a good or service, you should be able to, trade with whoever you want, but it helps the GDP as well. People say, well, but what happens if we get cheap goods in our country? Well, great, then our poor people, can buy clothing and food. And that doesn't mean that people are going to stop buying better clothes just because, we've got cheaper goods. It just means that people with less money will be able to buy more.
Thank you. We are ready for another video question.
Okay, great.
Hello, my name is Nick, and I'm from Arizona, and I support Joe Jorgensen. My question for you today, Joe, is going to be, I heard you say you want to take the troops off of foreign soil and bring them home and adopt a defensive posture, and it sounds very good. My question there for you would be, doesn't that risk us losing some intelligence and some sort of hands-on information that we would not normally have via a very far distance? Thank you very much.
Hey, well, first of all, thank you for being a supporter. I really appreciate that. So the question was military intelligence. And, would we be able to, know what's going on in the world? Well, let me point out that we wouldn't need as much military intelligence if we weren't in active war. Now, this is something else that libertarians disagree on. I do think that we need to keep military intelligence. However, you don't need to have bases with thousands of troops around the world, or thousands of troops in each country. You can do military intelligence with very few people, so we need to reduce it. And by the way, I know you didn't ask this question, but I think this is a good point to bring up. Absolutely, we've got to stop surveillance on the American people. It's one thing to know what's going on around the world. If somebody finds out, if China finds out where our submarines are, of course we need to know that. However, we don't need to be spying on the average American. So yes, we do need military intelligence, but it needs to be very much reduced.
And we are going to take another video question.
Great.
Hello, Dr. Joe. Thank you so much for talking to us and getting answers for our questions here. I wanted to ask a question as a 23-year-old here in the States. I've been putting into my Social Security since I was 14 years old. I had my first job coming out of my freshman year of high school. And so my concern is always going to be, is that money going to be there when it comes time for me to take that benefit out, to take the same benefit that everyone in the past has taken? So my question to you is that a program that we revitalize, or is that a program that we change up entirely? What's your plan for people like me who have been putting into this for almost the past decade and are expected to keep on putting into that and might not know if we get anything out of it? Thank you so much.
Well, that's a great question. So for those of you who didn't hear, he's asking about Social Security. He's 23 years old and wondering, will there be any money left for him? Do we keep it hobbling along? Do we fix it? What do we do with it? Well, my question to you is, do you really think that the politicians can fix this? Do you trust the politicians to do what they're supposed to do? And I got to tell you, I don't. I haven't seen the government do much of anything more competently than an American company could, than an individual could. And so I actually support a system similar to the Cato 6.2% solution. So somebody such as yourself, yes, you should be able to opt out of Social Security immediately, because personally, I don't think it's going to be there for you. In fact, I'm talking to 50-year-olds who don't think it's going to be there for them. So I think being 23, I think that'd be very overly optimistic to think that it would still be there for a 23-year-old. However, we can't yank the rug out from grandmother. Not every grandparent has grandchildren who can support them. We don't have the private charities out there that are ready to take on that kind of load. Now, keep in mind that the money that was taken from these people and put into Social Security, first of all, it was taken out of their paycheck before they even got their paycheck. So it was taken out from them against their will. So I think we need to make good on it. And secondly, it wasn't put into the lockbox that Al Gore told us about. Instead, it was used to run the government. It was used to spend money on things that should have never been bought, like downtown office buildings and so forth. So what I would do is I would sell government assets, such as downtown office buildings, oil rights, mineral rights, and so forth. Get government out of the stuff it should have never gotten into to begin with. Now, their money was used to pay for that. Let's sell it, give them their money back that they put into it, and then they would be in control of their funds so that they would have something that they could rely on and not be under the whims of Congress. Because so even people who are on Social Security now, they worry every year, are we going to get a cost of living adjustment? Are we going to get an increase this year? So again, we need to take it out of the hands of the likes of Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump and put it into the hands of the people who earned that money.
All right. That was the last of our video questions. So
okay.
We've got a few more questions from you now.
Okay.
Changing gears a little bit from that, you say on your website that the freedom to trade and travel is fundamental to human liberty. Mm-hmm. As president, what step would you take to protect those rights?
Well, in order to protect those rights, you first have to have those rights, and I really don't see those rights. And, you know, it's really a shame what Donald Trump has done with, you know, and we literally call it a tariff war. There's a reason we call it a war, because it is essentially a war. And we've got Donald Trump who's upping the ante on that. And I point to Japan. You know, we got into World War II because Japan bombed us. And many historians say they bombed us because they were upset with the tariffs. And now I say, look, Japan's not going to bomb us now because of all the Toyotas and Hondas that we buy from them. You know, you tend to not bomb your best customers. So let's be good trading partners with these people, get rid of the tariffs, allow people to visit countries, and let's be on favored nation status with everybody and be friends with everybody. And of course, an old saying, when goods cross borders, troops don't have to. Japan's not going to bomb us like they did back in the 1940s. So let's do that with every country.
What about when it comes to immigration?
Yeah, I want to turn immigration back to the way it was before we closed our borders in the 1920s. And a lot of people don't realize that we had open immigration and we didn't have a lot of problems. In fact, 3 of my grandparents are immigrants, and they came over here in the teens before the borders were closed in the 1920s. And looking around, I tend to see 2 major objections. First of all, a lot of people say, oh, well, they're coming over here just to live off of us, just to get free welfare. Well, there are already protections in place. There are, for instance, for many of the welfare programs, you have to be here for 5 years first. But the stats just don't prove that out, that they're coming over here to live off of us. If you look, the GDP goes up overall from immigration. And the second thing is with crime. And to watch one news channel, you kind of get the idea that immigrants purposely come over here to drive drunk and kill us, you know? But if you look at the numbers, the average person born on foreign soil commits less crime than the average person born on American soil. So I say let's, immigration is what made America great. It brought people like my grandparents over here, so let's keep it open.
Thank you.
Or rather not keep it open it back up.
Yes. Moving on to another thing that you've talked about is pardoning Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. Could you explain? I know those are sort of 2 different things, but sort of,
Yes.
we're sort of the same sort of, both charged with the crimes of information.
Right, information.
Can you explain why you would pardon them?
Well, again, if there is no victim, there is no crime. Basically, we had Edward Snowden telling us about mass surveillance and Julian Assange telling us information that we should have known about Afghanistan and basically what the American government was doing. So if there is no victim, there is no crime. And I would pardon them on the first day along with Ross Ulbricht.
I was going to say, what about Ross Ulbricht?
Ross Ulbricht, Chelsea Manning, and everybody else on the list. If there is no victim, there is no crime.
While we're on the internet and information freedom,
Yes.
both Biden and Trump have had big plans to crack down on, or have announced big plans to crack down on social media and tech companies. Trump is trying to ban the popular video app TikTok and also the messaging app WeChat. Sorry, forgetting the name for a second. Citing dubious national security issues that he can't really explain.
Right.
I guess, would you ban TikTok is my first question, and do you think the president should have a role in deciding which private tech companies get to operate or which apps get to be on American phones?
No, that's overreach. And people early on were calling Trump fascist, and I thought that was an unfair label. However, this is fascism. This is the definition of fascism, when the government starts dictating what private companies do. And we need to stop it. And I understand some of the frustration with some of these big tech companies, not TikTok so much, but like Facebook and some of these other companies. And, yes, they are abusing their power. However, I would say that it's up to the individuals to take them down, because the individuals can do so much more than the federal government. And all you have to do is look to IBM. So I actually worked for IBM in the early 80s. And that was around the time that the Justice Department dismissed their lawsuit. And a lot of younger people don't realize that IBM for like 12 or 13 years was being investigated, was being challenged by the Justice Department.
For antitrust? Or for,
exactly, antitrust. And that's why I'm going in with Facebook, because some people are going in and saying, shouldn't the government go in and control Facebook? And I'm broadening this to be, can government go in and actually fix problems? And I'm trying to make the point that the free market can fix problems better than the government. And in fact, back then back then we didn't have the internet like we do now. So supposedly enough paperwork was generated to go to the moon and back, or at least out to the moon. I'm not sure if it came back from the Justice Department. And yet IBM still remained IBM. And what was interesting is I had a conversation with a socialist who said, you know what? When the Justice Department, because she was sure it was going to happen, when the Justice Department breaks up IBM, they're going to break IBM up into 7 companies, each the size of boroughs. Isn't that great? And yeah, today people are like, what's a boroughs? Well, for us old timers who know about boroughs, a computer company that was one of IBM's largest competitors. And no, boroughs couldn't knock them down, but who did? It was 2 guys in their garage coming up with Apple. And think about it. With IBM, they had this capitalization. They had all this equipment, machinery. They had all these advantages that a small company didn't have, and yet still, individuals did a better job of knocking them down than the federal government. So I would suggest that, I'm not going to bet my money on the federal government fixing the problem. I'm going to leave it up to the individuals.
So you would not go in for all these antitrust hearings against the companies nowadays?
No. And besides, we've got free speech. And personally, I think that Facebook and some of these other people, I think they are abusing they put themselves out as like, we're the town hall, we're the town square, where everybody gets to share ideas. And then they censor us. And that's wrong. But they're a private company. They have the right to. And guess what? If IBM was knocked down by 2 guys out of their garage, so can Facebook. And I know to young people today, they look at Facebook and it's so big, it could never be knocked down. Hey, IBM looked really big to us in the 70s. If IBM can be knocked down, other companies can be knocked down as well. And I put my money on the individuals and not the federal government.
That brings me, I guess, to maybe my last question here. And since you were talking about the 70s, we'll go not quite back that far, but since you ran for election, since you ran as the VP candidate back in 1996, what are some of the biggest changes that you see in the political process, or in just with the election hoopla, or anything like that since between now and the last time that you were running?
Well, first of all, we're sitting here live streaming. I don't remember any live streaming being done in 1996, no. But the saddest difference is I remember I was railing against the size of the federal government, railing against the $5 trillion debt. And such a big hole we had dug ourselves into. How are we ever going to dig ourselves out of a $5 trillion debt hole? Now I look back and that actually sounds quaint. Now we've got a debt that's 5 times that size. And it's just ridiculous how, libertarians have been sounding the alarm that government is getting out of control. I'm hoping that people are finally waking up to that. And, I've been so, my heart has really been warmed during the coronavirus, because for a while there I was thinking, you know what, I think maybe Americans are just losing their individualism. They're losing their independence, their go get it, get out there and get it done. And then after we were all put under house arrest and all told to wear masks, then I see the people in Michigan storming the State House. I see them protesting. And I'm like, you know what? there still is a fight left in the American people. They really do realize that freedom is the way to go. There are people who want their freedom back, who realize that they know best what's best for them, that they can spend their money better than any special interest or bureaucrat in Washington, and that they should make their own decisions about healthcare, about education, about how crime is handled locally, all of those decisions. And so it's really great to see that. And so I'm hoping now, even though we weren't able to do it in '96, I hope now that people are really seeing, and I'm seeing it myself, I'm seeing people saying, you know what? Yeah, the government just has gotten into my life in too many ways. And so I'm hoping to change the course of this country and before we dig ourselves into an even deeper hole.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh,
that
well,
was
thank
the
you.
last question I had for you. So I don't know if you want to tell people where they can find you and what they should do next if they are intrigued by things you've said here tonight.
Oh, thanks, yes. So our website is joe20.com. That's JO20.com, Joe without the E, or the better Joe, as people have been calling it. And I would like to point out, you know, 75% of our volunteers are from outside the party, and it's been that way pretty much from the start, which is pretty unheard of for a libertarian campaign. And so it just shows that people are sick of the old way of doing things. And so, yeah, if anybody here loves our ideas, you know, please check out my website. We're at joe20.com and see how we can change your life and how you know better how to support your family. You know better what your family needs. You know better how to spend your money than anybody in Washington. So thanks so much.
Thank you. And I am Elizabeth Brown. You can find me at reason.com or feministforliberty.com or on Twitter at @ENBrown. I hope it's okay that I just plugged all that. And thank you so
Absolutely.
much for talking to me tonight. This has been lovely. And
Oh.
thank you, everyone. Round of applause here for Joe Jorgensen. Yay.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks.